Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a book that I finally added to my collection. I'm a little bit late to the party with this one. This is the Avengers Omnibus Volume 5, came out in I think September or October 2023, so a while ago now, but it was always going to be one I would get to eventually, so here I'll be finally getting a chance to talk about it. I have already reviewed Volumes 1 to 4 on the channel before, so if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on any of those, then obviously feel free to check those out as well. But basically, to summarise what I've said in those before, I am a big fan of this kind of classic Avengers stuff through the Silver and Bronze Age. With this 5th volume in particular, you know, the material in here is going well into the mid-70s, well into the Bronze Age era. So just great to see more and more of this being collected over time. Already I can tell you I'm hoping for a Volume 6. I feel like there surely will be one at some point, but hopefully it'll just be sooner rather than later. Before we dive into the book itself and take a look at what's actually going on in here then, let's just have a look at the dust jacket. This being the standard variant cover, featuring Hellcat there front and centre, and the Beast as well. There's a couple of members who joined the team during this run of issues. On the back, you get your classic cover gallery there, obviously. A lot of these are 70s issues, Avengers, all classic stuff, love that. And the material down there at the bottom, this is a pretty sizable chunk of issues 120 to 149, plus some other crossover stuff and giant size issues. Plenty going on in here. On the book itself then, obviously that kind of simple classic design they go with on these Silver Bronze Age era volumes, where you just got, you know, you're mostly plain black, but you've got your Avengers logo obviously on the spine, you get your creator names and a little image down there of the team, and then your classic sort of Avengers A logo on the back as well. Pretty sleek design, I like that. So then moving into the book, I won't be breaking this down issue by issue, you know, I never do that. But I do just want to give my usual spoiler warning just in case, because I will talk about a few key things that go on in here, and, you know, I'll be flicking through the book, so it might be I show something off you don't want to see. You know, I always say, just because these are old comics doesn't mean everybody's read them already or knows what happens in them, and I'd hate to spoil it if you don't want to know. So, yeah, just a fair warning there. But as we look at this creators page then, there's one name that stands out for me as being a key selling point for this volume in particular as to, you know, why I personally was so happy to get this one. And that's because we start to see the first run of issues on this series by George Perez. Just one of my favourite artists, one of the all-time great artists to ever work in comics as far as I'm concerned. And it's just good to see, at long last, this first run of Avengers, because, you know, before he did some of the things he's probably best known for, like Crisis on Infinite Earths, New Teen Titans, Wonder Woman, all that stuff he did with DC in the 80s. He did a pretty long run on Avengers in the 70s, you know, from about 75 up to 1980. He didn't illustrate every issue, but, you know, he did a lot of them from about issue 150 onwards. So, you know, it's cool to see those first few issues in here. A volume 6 would contain a lot more Perez artwork, and, you know, that's, for me, again, just to say it once more, that's why I'd love to get a 6th volume purely for that, you know, as much as everything else. But the contents page then, so yeah, so we're going from, you know, well into the mid-70s here, 74 to 76, you get your publication dates for all these issues. An image of Mantis down here. She is pretty much front and centre for at least half of this omnibus, the first half of it. She's introduced by writer Steve Englehart, who is your main writer during this time. There's an introduction here by him actually where he breaks down, you know, the first part of what's in this book. The introductions are scattered throughout. They're taken from Marvel Masterworks volumes that have come out in previous years, because this is obviously just like reprinting Masterworks all together in one big book. That's effectively what omnibuses are. So yeah then, so you can't really go through this and not talk about Steve Englehart and Mantis, because he created this character and was kind of obsessed with her, to be honest. Quickly, Mantis took on a bit of a life of her own, in his own words, and he found himself just like increasingly captivated by his creation and telling stories featuring her and exploring her origin and her powers and all that. So the Celestial Madonna story arc, which you get into pretty soon in here, is all about Mantis, and it's about her past. You know, she has a relationship with the Kree. She comes into the story initially as a kind of girlfriend of the Swordsman, who was a classic Avengers villain turned ally. Yeah, she comes from Vietnam, and she's initially just kind of like a fairly low-level, sort of low-powered character that doesn't seem like she's going to be too much of any significance, really. But then Englehart quickly changes that around and makes her the focus of this huge story that gets going. Before you get to that, though, there is this crossover with Jim Starlin's original Thanos Infinity Stories from the 70s, where Thanos' first scheme is foiled by the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and others. So there's a little bit of crossover with that. That does double dip a little bit with the Thanos Wars Infinity Origin Omnibus. I've talked about that before. So if you've got that, you'll see 2 or 3 issues of that in here as well. You still get some classic sort of silliness though. The Bronze Age was this transitional period for comics where they went from the kind of pure silliness and wackiness of the Silver Age into more mature content, more mature themes and ideas and all that. But there were still weird issues where the Avengers would fight a giant dinosaur man, for example. So if you're a fan of that kind of Silver Age silliness, as I am, I always found that to be quite fun. You still get a bit of that in here. But as I say, you're just getting gradually, through the 70s in general, comics were moving, more towards being a little bit more, I suppose you could say, a bit more serious. But here are those issues of Starlin's Infinity Story. As soon as you start to see Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock, there's a good chance that Jim Starlin's involved somehow. He loves those characters as much as Englehart loves Mantis, I think. Yeah, so you get a bit of that story going on, but then you kind of shift it back to Mantis again, learning more about her. So she really is the focus of this. You find out more about, she's got this destiny to be the Celestial Madonna, this kind of perfect being. You learn that she trained with these kind of spiritual monks, that she's got this great destiny. Her powers kind of expand and evolve over time, not just through here, but as time goes on beyond this as well. She's a character who went through a lot of change. Then you get other things like here, the wedding of Crystal and Crystal of the Inhumans and the Quicksilver. So there's an issue of Fantastic Four here where everybody kind of ends up going to that wedding. You also get the drama as well, the classic sort of soap opera antics going on through this time where Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, obviously brother and sister, she gets annoyed at him because he's getting married and not telling her. Then you've got other things going on like Scarlet Witch and Vision, who are together at this point. That relationship is challenged a little bit by Mantis because she has a bit of a connection to Vision, fairly briefly at times. So you get all that kind of stuff going on, all that good stuff. Very much storytelling of the time, and I suppose of comics in general, really. But so that's really the main focus. I'm trying not to go into too much detail here because I don't want to break the whole story down. But really, if you're interested in the character of Mantis, then the stuff you get in the first half of this omnibus, I'm sure you will enjoy because it's very much how she came to become a fairly prominent character in Marvel. But I suppose on the other side of that, if you're not interested in Mantis at all, then you might find all this a bit of a drag. But she is different. I will say this, as is often the case, she's not how she is in the MCU. A lot of people probably learned about Mantis from the Guardians of the Galaxy films. She's not really like that. It's really quite a very different version of the character. And, that's something obviously you'll learn more about if you go through this and read it if you haven't already. Moondragon, she comes in here, so she joins the team as well. Another character who kind of ended up getting involved with Jim Starlin's whole Cosmic Infinity stuff in later years. But she's a pretty cool character. She comes in here, obviously the Beast, Hank McCoy, joins the team during this run of issues as well. And you get another wedding, as if one wasn't enough, with Quicksilver and Crystal. You also get the wedding here at last of the Vision and Scarlet Witch, something that had been sort of teased at for quite a while with their growing relationship over the years. But yeah, so got a lot of classic moments in here, really, when you think about it. That wedding being pretty significant. The Beast, so the Beast at this point, he is blue and furry. He didn't start out that way, but by this point, when he joins the Avengers, these are kind of some of the earliest issues where he started to look like that for the first time. And I'm sure, that's how most people think of the character anyway. It's like the iconic look these days, obviously, of what the Beast looks like. But yeah, so he joins the team. So, the Beast, quite an interesting character who's often kind of flipped between being an Avenger and being an X-Man. Started off with the X-Men, obviously, then came over here and joined the Avengers and has sort of gone back and forth between the two teams ever since, really. Plus, Plenty of different characters though, you know, you see just flicking through this. One thing I always really liked about the Avengers from very early on, I think this was something they got so right about this series, was that kind of fairly regular rotating door of membership, of characters kind of coming and going. So, you know, you'd only ever read a few issues at a time usually before somebody new comes in, somebody goes out, somebody replaces them. Keeps them from getting stale, always did, you know, and I think that's what made Avengers, you know, even from early on, even in the Silver Age where, you know, early Avengers is not the most exciting series. You know, I've ranked Silver Age omnibuses before and I mentioned that, but it stands above a lot of other series of that time because of that fact, you know. It never gets too stale. Anyway, that is still the case here, you know, that regularly changing cast of characters. And I just really enjoy this, you know. I think, you know, here comes Hellcat, yeah, when she first joins the team. Another pretty cool character, you know. Just cool to see different characters getting involved, you know, I always liked that. But it'd be great to hear what other people think of this, you know, this run of issues as well. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all classic material, and as far as I'm concerned, you know, starting to see artwork by George Perez, you know, throughout here is really cool. I do really hope we get a volume 6 sooner rather than later. That would be great. But let me know what your thoughts are on this one, because you know, it's something, as always, I'd be happy to hear people's thoughts on. But I mean, here's, you know, George Perez artwork, and it's quite relatively early Perez artwork, so it's not his very best stuff, not at this point, I don't think. But nevertheless, you know, it's clearly, you know, you can see the sort of foundations of the great artist he would be. And even here, for example, you see that kind of classic Perez talent of being able to draw just huge amounts of characters on a single panel or on a single page. Something that became kind of his defining skill and talent, you could say. And already, from pretty early on, he's flexing that ability. So really cool, really, really great. Such a great artist. Yeah, I'm a big fan. But yeah, so we get to the back then, and then obviously we get usual sort of extras section. Quite a bit in here. You know, a few character sketches. Dave Cockrum artwork there, that's cool. And then you get usual sorts of alternative colours and promotional material. This is cool. Neil Adams cover there. Anyway, yeah, so that is the Avengers Omnibus Volume 5. And let's just hope we get that Volume 6, you know, before too long. But thanks as always for watching. You know, that's appreciated as always. Do let me know your thoughts on this one. If it's something you read before or just planning to check out. Always happy to hear the thoughts of others. But yeah, thanks as always for watching. That's appreciated as always.